Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I know it's been a little bit. I know we've been working on just kind of catching up. Speaking for yours truly, doing a lot of catching up. But now we are kind of rolling into the end and talking about our final subject, which is sonata form. Now, sonata form is it's interesting because a lot of people kind of call it a form a lot. In a way, yes, it's a form, but more so, it's kind of more of a formal process than a set kind of cut and dry form like a binary or ternary form. The word sonata actually traces back to 16th century, and originally the word sonata was to indicate a piece that was just performed instrumentally without vocals, or wasn't vocal at all. Funny thing, you'd be pretty hard pressed to find any sonatas, even to this day, that involve voice. But there's one or two out there. But sonatas are still performed even today, or composed today as well. For example, composer Chris Cerrone has a violin sonata from 2 years ago, which is just a great piece. Um, so sonata form has really taken a journey from the 16th century, where it just meant instrumental performance, to more of a set formal process, a little bit more dialectical in nature in the 18th century, which is what we're going to be focusing on, with Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven being the main three that composed this style of work. To later sonata kind of recapturing just instrumental form, and being kind of reappropriated and reimagined by composers all throughout the late 19th through today. So let's get right into it. Stephen Late's the chapter that I sent to everyone kind of sums up the sonata form process in 3 steps. The first one being that it opens with material in a tonic key. The second being that the additional material that comes out is in a contrasting different key. And the third thing is that all materials are restated in that tonic key at the end. So the material that was in that contrasting key, the second tonal theme, which we'll get into defining those in just a second, comes back at the end, and it's in the first tonal area. That's really the sonata concept. Now, as we may already know, a sonata form kind of falls into 3 set parts: a exposition, a development, and a recapitulation. Recapitulation. Couldn't even get that one out. However, a sonata form is not really kind of analogous to a ternary or a 3-part form. Really, it falls more into the category of a type of balanced, rounded, continuous binary form. Balanced, rounded, continuous binary. I know, say that about 3 times fast. And here's why. We're going to do a little bit of an example. We're going to study 2 different formal maps here with a rounded, continuous, rounded, balanced, continuous binary form, and then a typical sonata form underneath. And we'll see where there's a lot of overlap, and we can see where sonata form, or the concept of a sonata, came out of this type of binary form. So let's take a look at this, our top here. Oh, there we go. So we'll take a look at that. So we start with our A theme in our tonic. Then we go into our dominant. Now this is if this is in a major key. We'll talk about if it's in a minor key in just a moment. And we have a repeat. So repeats are very important here. We usually repeat that A material, that 5, leading to that 5, the dominant, usually leads us right back to the tonic, right at the top of the A section. Then after the repeat, we move into a digression of sorts. And this kind of is borrowing off of a little bit more of a dialectical approach to form, which we'll see a lot more when we get into sonata form. So we have kind of a digression, which is still working with that 5 and maybe developing it a little bit more, but in this kind of rounded, balanced, rounded, continuous binary form, we won't move too far away from 5 here. We might see a little bit of tonicization of 5, but really that's about it. And then we importantly move into a half cadence, a term interruption. Now this is going to be a big part of the sonata form. And then we see A prime at the end. We're back to 1. And the material that we had seen previously in 5 in our first section is now back into the tonic. at the end. It's the same material. Now, this concept is really important in what we're going to see with the sonata form. So now let's take a look at a typical sonata form, and we can compare the two. So if we take a look here, there we go. So we have our exposition, which will have our first and second tonal areas. So for here, again, like in a major key, it would be 1 and 5. If it was in a minor key, we would see typically minor 1 and 3, the relative minor. I'm relative major, sorry. Relative one's the, anyways, I got that mixed up. So we'd be starting with our minor key 1, and we'd be moving into our relative major key, which is built on the 3rd scale degree. So i.e., if we have something in A minor, our second tonal area would more than likely be in C major. And we have the repeats as well. This is important. Again, very much like our type of binary form up top. Now, after the repeat, when we come for the first and second tonal area twice, we usually go into a development section. Now, this is one that's different than the digression because we are working with a lot more new keys, tonifications, sequences. This is really kind of a place where composers like to kind of flex their kind of compositional muscle in using the first and second tonal area themes to really kind of have them argue and develop around each other. And after a while of that, we really pull into a half cadence at the end of this, a sort of interruption, very much, again, like our binary form up top. And this interruption could be anything from a deliberate stop in the musical texture to a kind of trailing chromatic scale kind of just wandering off, or the piece could just start to fragment and become just a little kind of like second that's kind of a trill that's just kind of hanging there. The main point here is that we'll find this interruption before we move into our recap, which we are now back in our tonic key. And most importantly, we move into our second tonal area, but now it's in the same key as our first tonal area. That's, again, the essence of the sonata concept, is that our second tonal area, when it's stated in the recap, is now no longer in 5 of the dominant if it's in the major key, or in our relative major if it's in the minor key. It's all in the same tonic key. That's the big sonata concept. And we can see, if we look at these two forms kind of on top of each other, where they sort of really can feel like they're, you can see the development here. So it's not quite a sonata form is not quite a ternary form. It's a little bit more like a more fleshed out and composed binary form, specifically the continuous rounded binary form. Now, let's take a little bit closer look at the exposition. In an exposition, we're going to have, of course, the first and second tonal areas. So as mentioned before, the first tonal area is going to be our tonic, be that a major key or a minor key. And our second tonal area is going to be in a contrasting key. So this could be for a major key. This is more than likely going to be the dominant. So i.e., if we're in the key of C major, this second tonal area would be in G major. And if it's in a minor key, it would be based on our relative major. So i.e., if we're in A minor, this second tonal area is more than likely going to be in C major. I should find a better method of erasing other than just using the top of this. It just takes a second. So we're going to take a little bit closer look at the exposition and talk about some components of the exposition that we're going to be looking for in our analysis. So we're going to label this exposition. So we have our first tonal area and our second tonal area. So we'll just label these 1 and then 5 just for ease here. So our exposition, we have our first tonal area, 1, and our second tonal area, 5. Pretty simple. But composers will often have components of this that are kind of in between. So the main thing would be a transition between the first tonal area and the second tonal area. Now, there are two types of transitions. We have either a dependent transition or an independent transition. Now, a dependent transition would be one where we are using some of the motivic material from the first tonal area. And it would start with that motivic material from the first tonal area, but then start to modulate and move towards that dominant key. We'd see a lot of kind of either sequences here, a lot of kind of tonicization of 5, kind of moving towards 5, getting to that good cadence, moving into 5, or whatnot. We'd be seeing a lot of kind of modulation. The second type that we would see is an independent transition. Now, this is entirely new material that we haven't seen before. Typically, it'd be something nondescript like arpeggiated material or scalar material, or just chordal material, really something that is not so much tied into a set thematic material. Now, before we get to the second tonal area, we usually have a small bit of a interruption of sorts. Not a full-on interruption, but one where we'll find the texture kind of have a little brief pause point. Now, again, this little pause point could be anything from a set literal pause, like a measure or so, where we just kind of stop, the musical texture stops, or it could be sort of a scale that just kind of chromatically goes nowhere, which we see quite a bit in Mozart. Or we can see just little fragmentations of seconds, which we'll see a lot in kind of Haydn. The things just kind of peter out, and then, wow, we're back to something new. Now, this little interruption, which happens right before our second tonal area, is what we're going to call a medial caesura, or MC. Now, what this is it's a term lifted from old poetry, particularly like Old English poetry, which just meant a break in the kind of a pause in the meter of a poem, which kind of usually mark the exact middle point of a poem. Now, here we're using it in an exposition, and the medial caesura marks the exact middle point of an exposition because it provides us that little tiny pause in the action or break between the first and the second tonal area. Now, after our second tonal area, we usually will have a lot of cadential motion that happens at the end. We'll see a lot of 5-1, 5-1, 5-1 at the end of the second tonal area before our repeats that bring us back to the tonic. What this is typically called is a codetta. In this one, we want to think a lot of 5-1, etc. in that dominant key. Yeah, so we're going to want 5-1, 5-1 in that dominant key. It should be a clear indication that we are setting up a codetta, which usually leads us to just that 5, a half cadence, which when we have that repeat sign, takes us back to the tonic. Again, a little bit of a layover from the binary form. Now, there's one important thing to talk about with the first and second tonal areas, is that oftentimes we will have one theme that distinguishes the first and second tonal area outside of the harmonic background of 1 and 5. There'd be a set theme that's associated with either of these. Now, when we get farther along in sonata theory, we will find composers that use multiple themes for a first tonal area and a second tonal area. Like later Beethoven will find a second, a third, sometimes a fourth first tonal theme and a second tonal theme. The big distinction here is the key centers. So you'll find multiple themes sometimes, but the thing to keep track of is are the key centers. They're usually still in that one, our tonic key or our dominant key. Now, after our exposition and after it's repeated, we move into our second part of the sonata form. Best part, in my opinion, because it's just so much fun. It's the development. Another easy way to think of to find out when we're starting development is it's the other end of the the repeat bar line. After it's repeated twice, we move into development. Now, one thing that usually happens in here that kind of clues us in that we are into a development section, particularly with Haydn and Mozart, who love doing this, is that they will state the first tonal area in the wrong key. So you'll hear the thematic material from the first tonal area, but it will be in a totally different wrong key. And that kind of perks our ears to like, wait, what's going on? That's the usual way that they'll start this development section. Again, as mentioned before, in the development section, they're going to be using a lot of the first and second. So the first tonal area and second tonal area, and all the themes that are associated with those. Remember, we could have multiple first tonal area themes and multiple second tonal area themes. The composer will then take those and develop them, start to kind of create these wider sequences with them, fragment them. Really, again, this is a place for the composer to really flex their compositional prowess. And to use more kind of the rhetorical idea of sonata form, this is where the main argument is. That is then resolved with the recapitulation. So after our first and second tonal area are moving into so many different keys, after we have this kind of big hashing out, so many different keys, we will get to a point where we'll have that interruption. If you think back to the graph, the formal graph that I showed in the beginning of the video, where we have this interruption, we'll move into a half cadence interruption. Now this marks the end of our development. We'll be looking for this half cadence and an interruption, which again, like in the exposition, could be a deliberate just break in the texture. It could be a scale kind of going nowhere, or kind of the music petering out and just kind of becoming little fragments that just don't go anywhere. Again, the big point here is that it's an interruption and a stop of the musical texture. Now, after that interruption, that marks where we are moving into our recapitulation, where we're going to see more or less the same exact thing as the exposition, but with a key difference. And that is going to be that the second tonal area is now going to be in the first tonal area. There is a resolution of the argument set up in the exposition with the two contrasting tonal areas. That, in essence, is the big sonata concept. All right. Thank you so much for stopping by. That was a kind of a quick little introduction to sonata form. There's going to be an extra credit assignment associated with sonata form that I'm going to be posting up with this video. So if you're feeling like you're a little bit behind, or you just like a little bit extra credit or a little bit of extra working on sonata, a sonata form diagram outside of our big project that we are currently working on, or hopefully working on, then I'll be posting that as well with this video. All right, everyone, have a great day. And if you're going to go out for Thanksgiving and stuff, please do stay careful. Everyone, it's just really important. I know this semester is kind of nuts, and this year's been nuts, but it might feel a little burnt out with it, but still remain careful and have a great week. Take care. Bye.